Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, we see that in the aftermath of all that is happening in Charlottesville, that there is a clear source of division that exists in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave. And unfortunately, that is something that shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. Conservatives are divided. The left is so tantamount in their push, so hell-bent on erasing the history of a particular geographical region of these United States of America, that this divided front that we're seeing on the part of conservatives is falling directly into the trap of those who have ulterior motives. As we have oftentimes reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists have always turned to the tried and true, albeit threadbare, tactic and strategy of divide and conquer. The very thing that they are hoping to achieve and accomplish in using that strategy and tactic is essentially to pit American citizen against American citizen in the hopes that we tear out each other's jugulars, bleeding this nation to the point of anemia. That is what they have always been dedicated to over the course of the past 150 plus years. And unfortunately, they have been very successful in obfuscating the truth, in making American citizens look upon each other as some sort of an enemy, some sort of alien group that has no connection with the greater good that exists in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. You see, that is what it has always come down to. And if we fall for this trap, and make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, as I sit here speaking into this microphone, conveying this message unto you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, this is a trap. It's a trap to engage in a sort of labeling. I know that my first officer, Jeremy Grabenton, has oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program that labeling is what the left does. In engaging with labeling, they can cause people to shut down their mental faculties and capabilities, to stop thinking, and to rawly emote. Now, yes, emotions are a great thing. They show that we are human, that we are alive, that we have compassion, that we do care for our fellow man. But if they are allowed to run rampant to the point of reaching raw histrionics, then it can be utilized in a way as to undermine what is important to us, to blind us to the great and grave dangers, the clear and present dangers that exist in this current fast-paced modern society in which we live today. And unfortunately, we live in an era where the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism are being utilized not only to divide the citizenry of the United States, but also to slowly, in incremental fashion, strip, deprive, alienate, and abridge us of our fundamental and inalienable rights which were endowed to us by our Creator, who happens to be none other than the God of nature himself. You see, this is part of what occurs when we don't have a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. We begin to view ourselves as competing and disparate factions. And I know that I mentioned on our last solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that this is what George Washington, the father of our nation, attempted to warn us about in his farewell address of 1796, and that is something we need to take to heart. It is something that we cannot ignore. It is something that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are attempting to utilize for their own benefit, for their own dark, twisted, and nefarious machinations, goals, and agenda. You see, they never break away from their agenda. They politicize everything. Stop and think about it for a moment. If we are going to just tear down monuments that were erected in most cases over 100 years ago, right around the century mark on a lot of them, why is it that now, all of a sudden, these things are offensive when they never had been in the past? It tells me that there is someone who is organizing this, that there is some sort of group that is pushing for this, and it's not just the average Fabian socialist. No, it's a George Soros effort. It's an effort by these other groups that have their own agenda, and it's because after the civil rights movement, the conservative movement within the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave essentially assumed a laissez-faire approach with the political opposition. And what I mean by that is live and let live, a detente mentality. And certainly that is a disparaging title that we have given to the so-called establishment wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, the detente wing. Because they don't stand up for anything. The idea was, if we leave them alone, they'll leave us alone. But the thing is, when we look at the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, they never can let well enough be alone. And this is because deep down in their heart of hearts, they are activists. More so than that, they are true radicals. Remember that the Bible that they live by, from Saul Alinsky, is entitled Rules for Radicals. They embrace that, but they attempt to project it onto their political adversaries because they realize they can, in incremental fashion, make it appear as though they are in the norm, or that they are the new established norm. And they've been very, very intellectually disingenuous in the form and fashion that they have gone about seeking to achieve this. You see, they try and say that, look, it's revisionist history. Yet they are the historical revisionists. They are the ones that are trying to say that, slavery never ended in this country. They're acting as though the institution of slavery, which was ended with the ratification of the 13th Amendment to our shared United States Constitution, either occurred yesterday or never happened at all, and that they need reparations. We have to erase the well-established history of the United States because, after all, we have systemic racism. That's the problem. They're running around creating these terms. They're running around creating issues where none exist. Or if they do exist, the past several successive decades have been addressing that. It makes me wonder, why is it that they do that all the time? And it's because what they're really about is changing who we are, erasing who we are, so that they can then redefine us as some sort of frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist dystopia that has no place in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of these United States of America. And what we see here is that the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery as well as involuntary servitude, except for penal punishments, that is, punishment for a crime, was passed in the Senate on April 8th, 1864, and the House on January 31st, 1865. And it was ratified on December 6th, 1865. So we see all of these claims by the revisionist historians that Lincoln freed the slaves. Well, this occurred after Lincoln died. It was ratified after Lincoln was assassinated. So therefore, he really didn't free the slaves. And of course, what they always try to say now is that the Emancipation Proclamation was what freed the slaves. But if you look at that, that's just a glorified executive order, and it stated in no uncertain terms that slavery was only abolished in the territories that were in rebellion. In other words, within the Confederate States of America, or by the point of the ratification, the former Confederate States of America. And what's so interesting, but also horrifying when you stop and think about it, is that there are so many, even on the right, who want to just go out and say that the average Confederate soldier and the Confederate leadership was nothing but a bunch of traitors. But that's not how they saw it. And they forget about the passing of the Posse Comitatus Act, which prohibits federal troops from being used against American citizens. And they forget the Supreme Court ruling of Texas v. White, in which the Supreme Court held that the Confederate States had never officially separated from the Union. So you see, there's a bifurcated narrative that comes to the forefront with this, and it's intellectually disingenuous to disregard these things. But there's this attempt to dumb it down, for lack of a better term, to basically say that our history was black and white. The Union was good and the Confederacy was bad. And yes, there are those who try and say that slavery was not a central issue to the conflict. Slavery was, insomuch as it was part of the greater economic issues that led to the war. The tariffs on goods, a redistributive scheme that was being put forth to help the northern states that had amassed a significant amount of debt. Look, we can't deny the factors that led to it. But at the same time, we should not be fighting among ourselves over something that occurred in a bygone era. In the aftermath of Reconstruction, which was devastating, we wanted to emerge as a unified nation, and it really wasn't until the time of the Spanish-American War of 1898 that we began to view ourselves in a cohesive form as an entire nation. But remember that James Madison had said in the congressional debates on the ratification of the original Constitution that the United States is neither a full republic or a full nation or a full confederacy of quasi-sovereign states. It's an amalgamation or composition of all those. And as you are well aware, my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that our allegiance isn't to any political party. It isn't to any of the sorts of political titles or labels that have emerged in the land of the free and the home of the brave. We are constitutional compositionists. We recognize that James Madison was right when he said that the United States is a composition of all of these elements. What's more, we want to go back to strict adherence to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution at all levels of government. And that means that we have to also acknowledge our history, the good elements as well as the bad elements. And when you stop and think about it, the only thing that defines us as a nation and people is the Constitution. That is why the old adage that the United States is a nation of laws and not of men continues to ring true. We choose not to unify around the color of our skin, on our ethnicity, on our gender, on any of those old vestiges of tribalism. No, we choose to unify around the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is known in the common American vernacular as the Supremacy Clause, is none other than our shared United States Constitution itself. But that's getting lost. That's getting lost in the rigmarole, in all of this puffery and obfuscation that has been pushed forth by the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, because they have a propagandist narrative and agenda that they are sticking to come hell or high water. And it falls directly into the dark and twisted machinations of the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists who want us divided. They're banking on conservatives being such free thinkers that we cannot look past the divisions of the past, and that we will be easily corralled and thereby labeled as the same as the alt-right, or as the same as these white supremacists that showed up at the Unite the Right rally there in Charlottesville, Virginia over the weekend. But we have to keep in mind that there is a greater good in these United States of America, that the whole is far greater than the mere sum of its parts, and that corrective steps have been done to remove the blight of slavery from our history. But to topple or trample upon the monuments of a particular geographical region of this great federalist, constitutionally endowed representative republic is to deny that there was a point in our history, and yes, it was a turgid, turbulent, and terrible period in our history, where the divisions that existed between the geographical regions of the then young republic led us to tear ourselves asunder and to fight one of the bloodiest wars that this nation has ever encountered in her relatively brief yet illustrious history here on the face of God's green earth. Stop and think about it for a moment. Some 600,000 approximately people were killed. That was roughly 2% of the population at the time. That means there wasn't a family, there wasn't a community, there wasn't anyone who was alive in the United States of America at that time who was not directly impacted by the horrors of war. And yes, some of the bitter resentment from that time has carried over well past a century and a half since the cessation of hostilities in 1865. But we also have to keep in mind that when these monuments were erected, in most cases over a century ago, or damn near a century ago, that what we were attempting to achieve was some sort of reconciliation. We were trying to heal the great rifts, divides, and scars and fissures of division and divisiveness that had propelled us to fight among ourselves. We have to get to that point. We have to be at a point where we can go back to being a free, strong, sovereign, and independent people. Now, I fully realize that this is far easier said than done. But then again, we have to once again ask ourselves why it is that we are rehashing the battles of the war between the states, or the war of the rebellion, or the American Civil War. Why? Well, again, when we look at the current form that the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists are pushing for, and the system that they have embraced wholeheartedly, it is divide and conquer all over again. to embrace the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism, thereby to keep us distracted as they work to further tear our country apart. This is tantamount, ladies and gentlemen, to cultural Marxism. I know that I've mentioned this on previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program, but it's so on point that it bears repeating again here. That these dark, twisted, and nefarious forces have been working at breakneck speed to undermine the values and traditions and institutions that we know and love here in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave, and they see no reason to back away from that now. In fact, we know that the push from Governor Terry McAuliffe to have all Confederate memorials within the Commonwealth of Virginia taken down, they are using this as an opportunity to continue to tear down the history of the United States. And one of the other things that we've brought up time and again, almost to the point of it reaching ad nauseum, is the Cultural Revolution that occurred under Mao Zedong in Communist China. Remember, what they did is they tried to wipe out the history of the old Chinese Empire to the nationalist Chinese Republic so that there would be no way to question the political dominance and authority and correctness of the communist regime. But what is so interesting is that last year, in fact, around this time last year, the so-called People's Republic of China came forth and admitted that the Cultural Revolution was a mistake. The problem that arises from that is it's too little too late. The harm and the destruction and the vandalism had been accomplished. And now they have a hole. A hole in their history that is not going to be repaired. At the same time, we look at the Islamo-fascists in ISIS as they go around toppling statues and monuments and historical artifacts and sites because it doesn't mesh with their religion. This type of barbaric close-mindedness is destructive. It's deleterious. It's detrimental. It cannot be accepted in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of these United States of America. Yet here we are. We know that for propagandist purposes, in communist Russia or the Soviet Union, that they would try to erase previous historical figures, tearing down their monuments, reducing to rubble the reputations that these people had. Why? Sheer political expedience. And when we look at the current state of affairs, what is unfurling before the shocked and horrified eyes of the nation in the wake of Charlottesville, and in the wake of the summer of political correctness, which was the summer of 2015, we see that those same types of dark and twisted machinations are coming to fruition right here in these United States of America. There's no way around that. And it is unfortunate to see that that is coming to fruition because for generation after successive generation, the American people, scoffed at that. They laughed at that. They said it would never happen here. But yet, here we are, in 2017, embracing the dark and grotesque specter of identity politics on both sides of the political aisle. And we find that we are as divided as we were in 1859, if not more so. And if you recall, folks, that was the year. 1859, 1860, that was the year before we tore ourselves asunder and annihilated or decimated 2% of our national population. And again, when we think about it, under the totality of the circumstances and with a modicum of objectivity, we begin to realize that those who fail to learn from the mistakes of the past are doomed to repeat history. It won't be exactly the same, but many of the elements will be the same, or substantially similar. And again, how do we withstand that? How do we address this? Well, the answer is simple. We do it not by pointing an accusatory finger at our fellow popular sovereigns, but we attempt to dig deeper to find what is the true underlying ulterior motive that has been propagating and propelling this. Look for the agenda, because the agenda is there. The agenda is one of divide and conquer. And it's something that Jeremy and I, as well as our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, have been attempting to warn you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, about since we aired our premiere episode on September 11th of 2015. Folks, it is undeniable that they are engaging in the sorts of things that Kat Sunstein did when he said, "Never let a crisis go to waste." They're fomenting this. They're fanning the flames of dissension. You notice the media doesn't talk about Antifa. They don't talk about the communists that were there. They focus on one specific group, one particular ideology. And yes, it's a grotesque and, dare I say, even anti-American ideology, white supremacy, all of it, identity politics, is dangerous. It is something that has no place in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of these United States of America. Now, it's far easier said than done to go through this, to try and claim that if we just take down some inanimate objects, then we will fix it for good. That just doesn't work. It can't work because inanimate objects have no connection with what is really going on. It's like those who attempt to blame the handgun for shooting someone. The gun grabbers, those who perpetually seek to punish law-abiding American citizens. It's the same mentality. And it's always a mentality to destroy, to strip, and to deprive. You know, they're not being open-minded. They're not sitting there saying, let's respect the views of those who disagree with us. Let's have civil discourse. That's not how this is going about. In Baltimore, Maryland, they voted to remove the statues and to destroy them, not even to put them in a museum. But as we pointed out on a previous show a couple of months ago, there was that Georgia councilwoman in Atlanta that wanted to force a museum not to show their signs and to say that there wasn't a battlefield that happened there, even though historical records showed it. That's the thing. You give them an inch, and they'll take the whole damn country. These people have a dark and twisted narrative and agenda, and it is one that is destructive. It is one that has no recognition that we are individuals. But when you go back to the foundation of this country, and the way that our founding fathers looked at the establishment of this federalist, constitutionally endowed representative republic of ours, they recognized that the government is not some sort of end-all, be-all solution to the plethora and cornucopia of issues that we face both as a nation and people. Rather, they viewed government as a necessary evil. But that's going to be swept away here. You see, they want the violence. They want to pit American citizen against American citizen in the hopes that we tear out each other's jugular, thereby bleeding this nation to the point of anemia, allowing them to march lockstep with their agenda, come hell or high water, irrespective of what that has impact-wise on the country. Whether it's good, whether it's detrimental or deleterious, they don't care. In fact, the worse it is, the more they like it. It's sick. It's sick, it's twisted, it's sad, but it is where we find ourselves right here and right now. But think again. Slavery has been abolished since 1865. Section 1 of the 13th Amendment reads in pertinent parts, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." Section 2. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. There it is. These monuments were erected after the ratification of the 13th Amendment. And as we know, based on the preamble to the Bill of Rights and Article 5 of the Constitution itself, these amendments are to be construed as though they were originally part of the binding Constitution, as if they had been there when it was originally drafted and ratified. That is what is ignored. Instead, they go after symbolism. Why? Because if you go after symbolism, and if you can compel American citizen to be hostile and in open conflict with his or her fellow American citizen, you are well on your way to being able to undermine all of the time-honored values, traditions, and institutions that we know and love here in the land of the free and the home of the brave. And that has been their modus operandi for all this time. It has been about divide and conquer. It has been about destroying us. And they're doing a good job of it. They are pitting us against ourselves in a very tragic way. Again, by breaking down into disparate and competing factions, we lose sight of the overarching picture that unites us, the supreme law of the land. And that is just tragic. Just tragic. And here's an interesting thing. The Gettysburg National Park has now come forth. John Street at the Blaze published, "The Gettysburg National Park reveals the future of its Confederate statues." Now, this is going to be interesting. It starts with, despite the decision made by many cities and states across the country to remove Confederate monuments in the wake of last weekend's white supremacist terror attack in Charlottesville, Virginia, one national park said it will not remove any Civil War memorials. Now, the very fact that this even has to be discussed, or the very fact that this was even being contemplated, speaks volumes about where we are as a nation and people right now. It tells us that these dark and twisted, as well as nefarious forces, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, their allies and the historical revisionists, are attempting to obliterate these monuments and memorials wherever they find them. Now, of course, they always go down the line of that intellectually disingenuous claim that, well, we want to put them in museums. Why? Museums have been the target of arson and vandalism. That's an excuse. It's a way to put a lead trial balloon out there to try and see if they can get away with it without there being a backlash. And folks, tempers are starting to flare. People are getting tired of this. When we desecrate the history of the United States, it means that they ultimately have their eyes on a greater prize or target. And that is going to be the monuments to our founding fathers. In fact, the good Reverend Al Sharpton has come forth and demanded that we tear down the Jefferson Memorial. Why? Because Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Now, what they don't mention is that the state of Virginia had laws in place that you couldn't emancipate your slaves. It was designed to protect an economy that had developed before we had even declared independence from Great Britain. The American South was an agrarian society. Slavery would have died out with the emergence of modern technology. Abraham Lincoln had essentially taken away the patent by one John Deere for a steam-powered tractor in 1862. Funny. See, there's always more to the narrative. The frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies in the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have an agenda. And if the full narrative of history and examining the totality of the primary sources creates a narrative that conflicts with their dark and twisted propagandist goals, they bury it. And they attempt to say anyone who is mentioning that are nothing short of revisionist historians. And you know, I know that we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have been very tough on the 45th president of these United States of America, Donald J. Trump, but we've also always given him credit where credit's due. And what he said about it's a tragic shame that we've been tearing down monuments, that you can't change history, you can only learn from it. I agree. It's one of those times that I actually agree with the president. I think he was a little slow and hesitant to condemn the white supremacists that had created this ugly image, this ugly narrative that the media is attempting to run carte blanche with, but on this, he's right. At the Blaze, they go on to say that the Hanover Evening Sun in Hanover, Pennsylvania, home to Gettysburg National Military Park, reported Tuesday that the Civil War Battlefield Memorial plans to keep all of its more than 1,325 monuments, markers, and plaques in place, including those dedicated to the Confederacy. Well, stop and think about this. If we are going to eradicate and eliminate all vestiges of the Confederacy, then we're wiping out the history of about half of the nation, approximately half of the nation. The crimes of slavery were not just limited geographically to the South. The South was, yes, primarily had put in their letters of secession slavery as one of the tantamount issues, but you've got to remember that it was in an economic sense. It's abhorrent to us today, but to judge a historical period by modern social mores and values is dangerous. If that was the case, we could go back and judge Magna Carta and say that the natural law tenets never should have been adopted in the first place. But when you stop and think about it, what has been the modus operandi of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists since the time of the end of the Civil War? It has been to get us away from that. It has been to embrace this leviathan and out-of-control administrative state that holds no accountability to the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people of these United States of America. Again, this should be an open and obvious fact. But it is not. It is because we have allowed these dark, twisted, and nefarious forces to attempt to divide and conquer. Now, in Georgia, one of the candidates for the governor of that state, is saying that she wants the memorial on Stone Mountain, just outside of Atlanta, depicting Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson, to be blown off the mountain. Why? First of all, it's on privately held land, so that's going to be interesting. If the government comes through with a law, that's going to be a huge violation of the First Amendment. But they don't care. In fact, that is their purpose. It is to strip and deprive and abridge and alienate us from our laws. And what that means is that they can then redefine us in ways that we shouldn't be redefined. They want us to become docile. They want us to become just slaves. You know, it's like I saw a meme in the annals of social media saying, tear down this monument to slavery, and it depicted the Internal Revenue Service, or IRS, building. Now, they don't want to talk about that. They want to go back after history. But Katie Lahone, who was the spokeswoman for the Gettysburg National Military Park, told the Evening Sun, quote, "These memorials, erected predominantly in the early and mid-20th century, are an important part of the cultural landscape." There you have it, folks. Again, remember what it is that these frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists are seeking to strip and deprive us of. They want to tear down our culture. They want to deprive us of our national heritage, character, spirit, but above all, identity. The American Civil War was a conflict between Americans. Both the United States and the Confederate States ended the name with America. We had a shared tradition. We had, and still have, a shared past. But to demonize and vilify the past, and to cast aspersions upon our fellow popular sovereigns, accomplishes nothing other than allowing the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists to further forward and advance their dark and twisted narrative. Again, ladies and gentlemen, that is something that we can ill afford to allow to come to fruition in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave. Because the moment that we do that is the moment that they will begin to move things ever further still. What this is, beyond a shadow of the doubt, is an attempt to engage in a cultural revolution in the United States based on cultural Marxism. And that's certainly what the original cultural revolution in China was. It was cultural Marxism. It was the Communist Party of Red China attempting to exert their dominance and to obliterate any opposing viewpoint, ideology, or history. That's why it matters. That is why we do have to discuss this. And I've noticed that there are some cynical people saying that, well, are there any memorials to slavery in the South? Yeah. That was one of the agreements in South Carolina. When they took the Confederate flag off of the State House and put it on the grounds there for a memorial for fallen Confederate soldiers, they also erected the African American Memorial, a monument to slavery. But of course, the left violated that compromise in the aftermath of the actions of that idiot Dylan Storm Roof, which set off the whole charade of the summer of political correctness, or the summer of 2015. They cannot allow there to be differing viewpoints. And again, it all falls back onto this fact that I've brought up time and again, almost to the point of it reaching ad nauseum here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists simply cannot compete or participate in the free marketplace of ideas because their ideology is theft and destruction and death by any other name. Now, it's interesting to note also, the National Park Service put out a statement as well. They said that, quote, "The National Park Service is committed to safeguarding these unique and site-specific memorials in perpetuity, while simultaneously interpreting historically and objectively the actions, motivations, and causes of the soldiers and states they commemorate." They told this to the Patriot News website. And it's important to recall that the National Park Service oversees the Gettysburg National Military Park. And remember that the Battle of Gettysburg was essentially the turning point of the Civil War. It was the beginning of the end for the cause of the Southern Confederacy, and it essentially led to the complete devastation of the South. And according to the History Channel, which is surprising, I'm surprised they weren't talking about aliens here, the Union lost more than 23,000 troops at Gettysburg, while the Confederacy lost more than a third of its soldiers, around 28,000 troops. That is staggering. That is staggering, and yet we want to open these wounds again. We want to rehash these battles. We want to refight the Civil War, because remember, as I've stated already throughout this show and on various previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program, at the height of the Civil War, we decimated 2% of the national population. You see, ladies and gentlemen, we can't afford to just turn our backs on this. We can't afford to ignore this. We cannot pretend that this is not a part of our history. And yes, it is a dark chapter in our history. But there are plenty of lessons which we can take to heart from this. Namely, that we came out of it as a stronger nation. As a nation dedicated to freedom and liberty. But, in a sense, we've also started to slide back on that. Because the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists want to further empower and further enable this out-of-control leviathan of an administrative state, they want to enslave all of us. Now, we know that the terror attack in Charlottesville, Virginia, resulted from the city's effort to remove a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. Several other cities, including Lexington, Kentucky, and Baltimore, have since accelerated plans to remove similar monuments. In other words, they are pouring fuel on the fire. They are giving these ragamuffins and rabble-rousers in the white supremacist movement ammunition. Why? Leave well enough alone. Stop tampering with our history. Stop trying to push an agenda that has no place in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of these United States of America. And seek to build a better future. There's no reason to hash out the wounds of a war that ended 152 years ago. The nation that existed before the Civil War is gone. Slavery is gone. Equal suffrage is here. And we are all free and independent thinkers and actors. At least we have the capability to be, if we so choose to do. Unfortunately, What the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are pushing for is an agenda that would strip and deprive us of that. They want us to not have that, and that has been their overarching goal since the time of the end of the Civil War. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that this continues to happen. It's interesting to note that the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, the nation's largest so-called Muslim civil rights activist organization, called on cities and states across the country to take down Confederate statues and rename roads and highways named for Confederate leaders. Now that's peachy keen and funny, because slavery is still running rampant in Islamic-dominated countries. That is the height of hypocrisy. But it shows you the way that the left is really working with this to undermine our established traditions, to tear us apart, to make us see each other as not fellow countrymen who share a filial bond and connection based on the supreme law of the land. No, they have gone forth and attempted to shame one particular geographical region of this country for a fight that ended 152 years ago. Stop and think about just how ridiculous that is, because truth be told, that is exceedingly ridiculous. Yet that is what they do. And they are not about to stop, because they believe they see a light at the end of the tunnel, and that light represents a complete, overarching, total victory for themselves. And if we continue to allow this, and if we continue to shove our heads up our posteriors, that is what the end result is going to be each and every time. It is not something that we can afford to do. It is not something that benefits us. It is not something that heals the wounds and past evils of this nation. But have you ever noticed? That's what the left always does. It's always pointing the finger at the country. It's always the blame America first crowd. They are destructive. Destruction is the only thing they know. Destruction is the only thing they understand, and destruction is the only thing they embrace. And that has been their modus operandi for generation after successive generation over the course of the past 150 plus years, and it is not going to stop. Instead of fighting among ourselves, we have to ask ourselves why it is we feel it is necessary to engage in this propaganda. Why do we acknowledge it? Why do we empower these nefarious forces to dictate what happens here in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave? We, as American citizens, are better than this. And it is high past time that we, in our capacity as United States citizens, put our collective foot down, stand shoulder to shoulder in solidarity and unity, and say enough is enough, focus on the problems that currently exist, instead of expending limited capital and resources on removing monuments that are offensive to some. Last I checked, when I looked at the four corners of our shared United States Constitution, we don't have the freedom from offense. In fact, the entire modus operandi behind the First Amendment, the entire impetus and driving point of that great amendment, is to protect that kind of speech. Now, yes, the fighting words doctrine does apply, but this drive to erase history, to eradicate a portion of this country's well-established past, is meant to divide. It's meant to be destructive. It's meant to cause the ultimate amount of pain and suffering for the American citizen. It's Cloward and Piven. Remember that Cloward and Piven were those two egghead academicians from Columbia University who back in the 1950s and 60s sought to overwhelm the welfare system to establish a permanent entitlement state to work in tandem with this Leviathan out-of-control administrative estate in stripping and depriving us of our rights. They have been dedicated to this all this time. And they've been ratcheting up the pressure day by day, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, decade by decade. They've done it in our ivory towers of academia from coast to coast and border to border here in the land of the free and the home of the brave. They've done it in the so-called mainstream media. And even some on the conservative side, like Rich Lowry, are saying we should mothball these monuments. Why? Why, when they were not a problem? Why, when they caused no dissension for decades, does it now all of a sudden magically become something? It tells me there's a political agitator, a rabble-rouser, who is attempting to redefine who we are both as a nation and people. And it is high past time that we say enough is enough, that we will not tolerate this, that we will not acquiesce to this, that we will not bow down to this, because it does not reflect who we are as United States citizens. When we begin to do that, and to consider all these things seriously, that is when we begin to allow ourselves to differentiate between that which is mere subterfuge and that which is substantially significant to placing this nation back onto the path to prosperity. And shouldn't that be the goal of American citizens? That as opposed to whitewashing and eradicating our past? Folks, it's not going to end with the vestiges of the bygone Confederacy. It won't end with our founding fathers. Ultimately, they will target the supreme law of the land itself because it was penned by evil white supremacist slave-holding men. At least that will be the narrative of these social justice warriors, the tolerantly intolerant. They are perpetually offended. It is their goal to continue to embrace identity politics as a wedge to divide and conquer the American people, to divide and conquer all that we hold near and dear, to pit us against one another, thereby distracting us from the real agenda that is motivating them. And if you notice, what exactly they are attempting to do and have successfully done or achieved is spreading the utmost amount of chaos in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave, and they are not about to stop. They are dedicated to causing as much pandemonium and chaos as is humanly practicable and possible. This is just the beginning, ladies and gentlemen. Just as 2015 was just the beginning, the assault on our liberties is going to worsen with each successive passing day. And therefore, it is our duty, obligation, but above all responsibility and our capacity as United States citizens to foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Because nobody else is going to safeguard it for us. Nobody else is going to take the steps that are necessary and proper to ensure that we preserve our rights. And if we think back to the damn near poetic language that is contained within the four corners of the preamble to our shared United States Constitution, we see that one of the duties and obligations as well as responsibilities that we shoulder as United States citizens is to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. In other words, for the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations which have yet to be born. But are we doing that by erasing our history? Are we doing that by taking down monuments and desecrating beautiful things that have existed within our culture and society? I believe that the answer to these rather rhetorical questions should be both open and obvious. This is not the path that we should be taking. It is not a civilized approach. This is, walking right up to the boundary of sheer, unadulterated barbarism. And that's not who we are. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back with one last round of alcohol. No, folks, she's not here to topple any glasses that you have. She's just there to pour you some alcohol. And if she does attempt to spill your glass, push her out of the plane. As always, folks, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for tuning in to our state-of-the-art radio program here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. We couldn't do the show without you, and we do the show to empower you. I invite you to leave any questions, comments, concerns, or even topic suggestions you might have, either in the comment section here on our YouTube page, or on our Google Plus page, or even our Facebook page. And on top of that, I invite you to follow us on Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. One more time, ladies and gentlemen, that's @RadioAviationEX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, as well as the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapington. You will find a link to our Blogspot account that is just chock full of useful information, and just as you will find in the description section of today's Solo Flight Special Edition of our state-of-the-art radio program, you will find the link to our Cafe Press account. Now, folks, at the Cafe Press account, we have all sorts of novelty items, trinkets, and goodies, monuments and memorials, if you will, to your own capability to be free-thinking individuals. They're on an assortment of products, such as hats, shirts, clothing, apparel, clocks, watches, laptop sleeves and protectors, smartphone sleeves and protectors, thermoses, mugs, license plate covers, you name it, it's all there, either with our original Radio Aviation Excellence logo, or our first-class passenger logo, or even the two Uplifting America logos, one of which we start the show with each and every time. Because let's face it, in these times of rank division, in the land of the free and the home of the brave, we could all use a little uplifting. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. We hope to see you again next time. Please do take care.